Hello, greetings. Hi there. I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome again to our next chapter of reading Machiavelli's Prince. In this talk, this video is going to be dealing with chapter 5 of the Prince, which again deals with the first, part of the Prince. The first 11 chapters are dealing with the different types of principalities, and now we're at chapter 5. We're going to be dealing with the title of it is on which mode cities or principates must be administered, which before they were seized used to live by their own laws. So again, this is the title. Again, always remember that the titles in the original Machiavelli's text were in Latin, but the body of the essay and the art chapter was in Italian. So here is the in chapter 5 we look at the question, but what mode cities or principates must be administered. Now remember, in chapter 2 he said I'm not going to talk about republics. He's talking about republics a little bit here. And in this chapter, this is going to be he's talking about republics who are used to living under their own laws, or cities or principates who are used to living under their own laws. Now, it's interesting. The title cities, right? This is the civitas, the civitates vel principatum, as in Latin. So therefore, the principalities and cities, the civitases. The cities implies a civic order, and therefore political order, and hence republics. So therefore, this is why it's he does, even though he says he doesn't, he does talk about republics in the Prince. And this is the question of before they were seized, they were under their own laws. So therefore, the focus of this is those orders, those cities, or things that were used to governing themselves. Okay, ready? Well. Again, this has 4 paragraphs. This is a very short chapter, relatively short chapter. And therefore, it starts out with the line, when the acquired states, as has been said, are accustomed to living under their own laws and in liberty, there are, for those who want to hold them, 3 modes of proceeding. First, to ruin them. The other, to go to live there personally, and the third is let them live under their own laws, levying tributes, and creating there a state of a few who will keep it friendly to you. So stop here. This is 3 ways of doing it. You ruin them. 2, you go live there. 3. You create there. You set an oligarchy up. You just let them keep their laws. In other words, they pay tribute to you. They live under their own laws, and they pay tribute to you. But you create there a state, the state for the political rulers, an oligarchy, set up a few who, or not maybe whatever, whoever is ruling there. Will be friendly. He says a state of a few. So it's oligarchy, aristocracy, few, not many, few, not popular. You don't set up a popular rule. You set up a few that will be loyal to you, that prince who's not living there. So those are the 3 modes, right? Such a state, having been created by that prince, knows that it cannot stand without his friendship and power, and that it must do everything to maintain him, semicolon. And one holds a city used to living in liberty more easily by the means of its citizens than any other mode if one wishes to preserve it. Now, he seems to be saying that if you wish to preserve it, it's better to have it ruled by their own citizens. And then, therefore, setting up in the oligarchy to rule them, a few to rule them, it sounds like he's saying that is probably the best. If you don't want to destroy them, if you want to preserve that, then living them than having them ruled under the things. That seems to be the best way to preserve. Okay, and examples there are the Spartans and the Romans. The Spartans held Athens and Thebes by creating their state of a few, an oligarchy, right? And yet lost them again. The Romans, in order to hold Caputa, Carthage, and Numia, destroyed them, and they did not lose them. Okay, now wait a minute. The Spartan and Romans, they held Athens and Thebes, right? The argument of the examples of the Spartan and the Romans. This gives us, and this is a very interesting thing. There's a big, in his discourses, in chapter 1, in book 1, chapter 2, paragraphs 5 and 6, Machiavelli gives a description, a comparison between Sparta and Rome. Now, he doesn't do that here, because he doesn't have time. He just leaves it to us to show that there's a difference here. That the difference is that the Spartans basically set up oligarchs, right? The Spartans set up oligarchs. The Romans, give the example he gives here of Caputa, Carthage, and Numia, what? They destroyed them, and they never lost them. So the Spartans set up states of a few, yet they lost them. And the Romans ruined them, but kept them. Okay? They wanted to hold Greece somewhat had the Spartans had, freeing them and leaving them to their own laws. And they did not succeed. So therefore, now I want to stop here. It's very interesting. The thing that in the last paragraph says that would be the best to do seems to be that the Roman and Spartan example doesn't show it to have any success. Okay, if you're reading this and you're saying, wait a minute, he says up here, if one wishes to hold a city living in liberty more easily by means of its citizens than any other mode, okay, then one wishes to preserve it. So therefore, maybe it's not that maybe it's the setting up an oligarchy. Maybe if you're smart, you would set up a democracy, but then what degree will they listen to you then? In other words, if you're going to set up a thing, he says set up a few. He doesn't recommend setting up the many as the rule. But the only way to hold a people used to living in liberty is by the means of its citizens. So this actually may be a kind of saying that it's not a good idea. It's not a good idea to do that, right? In other words, and therefore, they wanted to hold the Greece. The Romans wanted to hold Greece somewhat better as the Spartans did, freeing them and leaving them in their own laws, and they did not succeed. In such a mode, they were constrained to destroy many cities in that province to hold it. So therefore, you have that weird line: you had to destroy the city to save it, right? Corinth was completely destroyed by the Romans in 146 BC. So therefore, you have the example of this even before the rise of Caesar. In that sense, this is the Roman Republic. The Roman Republic extinguishes Corinth as it was, destroyed it, and it made it kind of Corinth then became a kind of a puppet of what it was, a Holy Roman puppet. Now let's go to the third paragraph. For in truth, there is not any secure mode of possessing such cities other than to ruin them. And whoever becomes the master of a city accustomed to living in liberty and does not destroy them, he waits to be destroyed by it. For it always has refuge in rebellion in the name of liberty. And the ancient orders, which are never forgotten, either through length of time or through benefits, and no matter what one does or provides for, if the inhabitants are not disunited or dispersed, They neither forget that name nor those orders, and immediately upon every accident they resort to them, as Pisa did 100 years after being placed in servitude to the Florentines. Okay, this is an example that he gives. This is on page 30, and on the next page, on footnote 7, he gives the example of this. That is, Pisa was acquired by Florentines in 1405, but in 1494, with the entrance of the French King Charles VIII, the Pisanians rebelled. Florence recaptured Pisa only in 1509, after a long and infinite vexation. In other words, they finally regained it, but it's now in other words, the Pisanians had this lusting for liberty, and that they once they got their liberty, once an occasion offered them, the invasion of Charles gave them the opportunity to do it. Now this is very interesting. He says here, what about this? You have, in other words, people using the liberty, you must destroy them. You must ruin them. If you don't, you're never going to be secure. Because why? He says, as again, repeat that line in the third paragraph. For there is accustomed to refuge and rebellion in the name of liberty in the ancient orders. Their memory, in other words, he says that they won't forget them. Time, as long as they have hope in that thing, and as long as they are what they are, they haven't, you need to what? As long as they're not disunited or dispersed. If the inhabitants are not disunited or dispersed, they need to forget that name, that the old order, and those orders, and immediately upon every accident they go to them. So every accident, every incident that allows for the occasion for the people to resort to that, they return. Now this is that case of the Poles during partitions, and why the Poles constantly rebelled against their Russian or their partition nations, the nation's partition, and had uprisings to reassert their national identity, only to be reasserted after the First World War because of the cooperation of the idea of that the Allied powers were promised that if these populations supported them, fought against the Germans, they would reward them. Part of the 14 points, right? This is the restoration of Poland and the creation of Czechoslovakia, right? And therefore, this is why we have this concept here, this idea that people who use liberty are constantly able to memory of it, their memory. So unless you destroy their memory, disperse them, so they're very all over the place, not where they were, not in their native lands. Disperse them. Send them to Siberia. Send them everywhere. But again, this is what the Russians are doing in Ukraine now, isn't it? They are when they capture parts of the Mariupol and places like this, they send the newly liberated Ukrainians. They send all the way, not to Sebastopol, but all the way to Vladivostok in the east. They send them away as far as possible, so they can't. They have no land, no place of their memory that they can. They're just dispersed and powerless in their new place, and then therefore they can become. They're just a minority, and that therefore they'll submit to the majority Russian identity. Okay, this is a kind of thing that what Machiavelli says. This is the danger of such things. This is why free peoples only way you can keep or master a free people is to destroy them, he says. Now, and he goes, this is the fourth paragraph, he says, but, this is, I'm going to go back to the beginning part, but before I go back to the beginning, remember that this is that weird thing. He has that, his whole tone here seems to be familiar, okay? The you he uses, second person here is a familiar you. He seems to bring an issue, but the city is mentioned for the first time in this chapter, right? And the city is mentioned for the first time at all in the Prince, in this chapter, in connections with the liberty. It seems that republics are especially cities, or that the mode and orders of liberty are principally are found principally to exist in cities and not in huge and amorphous political entities as empires, as D'Alvarez says on page 30 in his note. A city has a definite limited form. In other words, the political form in the classic mode of the city has a very limited form, and perhaps, and this is perhaps what is necessary for the existence of liberty. And this is what D'Alvarez makes a good point about this. This is why liberty may be tied to local community, tied to a local community, tied to an entity that has knowledge of each other and knowledge of things, that they have civic identity, friendship, associations, that everyone sees themselves as a sharer in the ownership of the republic, of the Commonwealth, and therefore this is now seen as something that is a joint enterprise of friends, of citizens, and this is why liberty is maintained in that sense. The question raised at the end of the first paragraph, D'Alvarez says, has to do with whether one wishes to preserve the Constitution and laws of the city or not. So therefore, that famous idea, do you want to preserve the laws of the Constitution? You want to wish to preserve them, or do you want to get rid of them? Now, the question here is clear. If you want to rule them, and you got to destroy them. There's no other way. The other two, he doesn't give. In other words, there's something he's silent about. There's three modes, right? We go live there. We first ruin them, go live there, and then third is to let them live under their laws, but make it rule the few, right? Letting them live there, letting them keep their government, but letting them keep their own democratic government, the rule not of the few but of the many, and tribute this. This is not addressed. It's not part of three, and nowhere does he address it. Okay, the Roman and in fact you can make the argument is that the Romans in their desire to do this always, not Romans, the Spartans always set up oligarchies. It's and every time they and that's why the Athenians always set up democracies, except the case of this is Athens goes to war with a democracy, and that is the famous Croatia, not Croatia, sorry, I'm incorrect. It's Syracusa, the Syracusa invasion. And there, Syracuse is a democracy. The exiles are usually the old oligarchs who resented the old democracy, and they convinced the Athenians, particularly Alcibiades, to go conquer it. And this way becomes a port, a means, a point where the Greeks could threaten Sparta from two sides, right? The danger, now the problem here is the Spartans are, Alcibiades switch sides. He informs the Spartans, and the Spartans are able to help the Syracusans. But the Syracusans defeat the Spartans with the help of the Syracusans, defeat the Athenians. The Syracusans are not then lose their democracy because of this. Their democracy, and that's the only case. Usually the Spartans, when they conquered Athens, when they finally defeat Athens, they'll put an oligarchic regime in power. They do this anytime they win. They'll put if the city they're opposing is a democracy, or they'll put this is why he says they lose it. Okay, because what happened is in every case the popular sword or the opposition comes in and overthrows the Spartan control. So therefore, the history of the Spartan example is that you can't, setting up regimes favorable to you doesn't really last long. Once and if you cannot keep them in power, they will immediately throw them off, and and particularly if they're used to being free. If they're used to being free, not only remember, this is interesting. It says it speaks of used to live by their own laws. Well, here, the idea of being under their own laws implies liberty in the body of the text, which is not necessarily implied in the title. The title gives a broader conceptualization. So therefore, we have this a thing not mentioned as an option, And then what's interesting is the one that is, the middle that is not discussed. Nowhere it is discussed of going living there. Okay, so therefore we end. Now let's end the paragraph here, right? This ends the end the chapter here with the last paragraph, the fourth paragraph. But when cities or provinces used to living under a prince, and that blood is extinguished, since they are on the one hand used to obedience, and on the other hand deprived of the old prince, they will not be able to agree upon choosing from one among themselves to rule, and they do not know how to live in liberty. Okay, so therefore, if it's a prince, in other words, a province or things like this, and they're used to being under a prince, and if you just exterminate, if you kill that prince's and their line, those who oppose you, those within that state that they conquered thing that want to oppose you, who's going to be the new prince? If you get rid of you, they don't know. They can't. There's no one clear is going to be the prince, because the line is extinguished, and there's no real clear party or group and they won't agree. It'll be difficult to get a mass agreement on this, and because of this, they don't know how to be free. They don't know. They won't agree on a prince. They don't know how to live without one. So therefore, you got control in that sense, right? So if you're going to conquer a place, it's better to conquer a place that's been used to living, who's not been free. Because if they're free, they're going to have memory of freedom, and even if you get control, they will rebel endlessly. So, and the only way you can keep them is by destroying them. Okay, and you now, if you want to keep them forever, you destroy them. Okay, as as Rome did to the three cities that he mentioned, particularly Carthage, right? Carthage must be destroyed, Cato would argue. And when it is, with that famous line, they created a desert and called it peace, right? That famous line. I think is it Tacitus? Yeah, I think it's from Tacitus. They created a desert and called it peace. This is how the Romans do. What did they do to Carthage? They destroyed it. They razed it to the ground. They assaulted the earth. They slaughtered the elite, leaders, and enslaved all the population, including the families and everything. The leadership class was exterminated. The survivors were all sent off to slavery, and the land was destroyed, brutally salted. They salted the earth, made it a desert. Why? Because they did not. They were sick and tired of Carthage and causing them grief. Even if it was they defeated them and they were under their tribunate. No, sorry, no. Now he continues here. I left it. And in this mode, they will be able to take up arms late. We talked about it, and a prince is able to win them over. In other words, in this mode, they will be very late to take up arms. And a prince is, this is what he said earlier about those who are not used to living in a prince. They were not used to being free. They were used to being a prince. You killed their prince off. They can't agree who should rule, and they also are not used to being free. So this is, they don't know how to live in liberty, semicolon. And in this mode, they will be very late to taking up arms, and a prince is able to win them over with more felicity and assure himself of them. In other words, he's able to, with some care and finesse, he's able to win them over. They're used to a prince. You just have to do some things to win them over. And you, if you're with felicity, you will. And felicity here is a good word, which it means with some care. Offer them some care. Offer them, do something good for them, and they see that as good for them, and therefore they will love you. Now they'll come to, not necessarily love you, but they'll come to, see you as the ruler. They will, if you rule over them for their benefit, then they will see you as their ruler. And since they have no memory of being free, they have nothing else to do, right? So they will. But now he goes point here. But in republics, there is greater life, greater hate, more desire for vengeance, semicolon. The memory of the ancient liberty does not leave them, nor does it let them rest. So the safest way is either to extinguish them or to go live there. Now this is interesting. Go live there. He doesn't give any examples of go live there. He doesn't give any example. The only example of going live there is the previous one, or I mentioned earlier, when the person who conquered Greece, the Turk who conquers Greece at Constantinople, he goes lives there. Okay, and this is it's the example of going to a foreign territory where you don't have the same language or something. So same thing. He gives the example of here, but this is a people of liberty. How can you do that? The Turk did not preserve the liberty of the Greeks. Okay, so that they made them all, because everyone in that regime is a slave to the prince. There's no one but the prince. Everything is centralized at that level. Everything is but a slave to the prince. So there's nothing. Machiavelli is silent about it. Now, what does the silence mean? The silence says there's no example given. Maybe there's no example given. Maybe it's not really a real option. Maybe the option is really destroy it, or in other words, this is the rule of the excluded middle, right? The middle is excluded because there's no possibility of it. So therefore, you have the two extremes. And the second one always fails. So it's reduced to, in other words, a possible option to go live there. She says, "Oh, destroy them or go live there," but go live there he never mentions. So we have a problem here at the end of this chapter. That is, we have an option that we don't have any example of, and the only example we have earlier is that of the Turk, and it's hardly a positive. In other words, yes, he can rule in it, and the people will look at that in a way because he's there, he's present, they have recourse to them. But again, these people are not necessarily the ones who are living. They're not necessarily ones who are living in liberty in that sense. They were under the Constantinople was the Holy Roman Emperor. This was the Holy Roman Empire. It was the Roman Empire, right? This is the autocratic remnant of Rome. It was when Constantine moved it from Rome to Constantinople, and in doing so, it made it more autocratic, less republican in character. Rome was always the reason why the empire didn't like Rome. The emperors didn't like Rome. The 8 emperors didn't like Rome is because all the architecture, first of all, it was pagan. Everything was pagan, and the second thing was all was republican. All this institution, and there's too many republican symbolism still there in the republic, and therefore, no. We needed to. Constantine picked the new city, one that had, in other words, had none of the pagan or republican architecture, and everything was therefore the imperial city of Constantinople becomes more. It is an autocratic order, not people who have been subject people before and are not used to being free, and therefore when there's not a people of liberty. They don't have a sense of liberty. So, but we end this chapter here is a very interesting one because we end with this discussion of people who are used to living in liberty. This is why many commenters like Rousseau and many writers will say that The Prince is really secretly not a book, Machiavelli in places like here, at these passages like here, makes winks to everyone that he's not really an ally of monarchs and princes, that he is really a champion of republics. Okay, that this is what Rousseau will say, that the Prince is really ultimately a secret teaching for Democrats, for the Republicans, by small R Republicans, not American politics Republican, but another aspect here is that this is not only him. There was many authors at the time, even with 100 years later, 200 years later after him, thought that there was something Republican in his character. Gentili, the Italian legal theorist who goes to work for Elizabeth, he in his book, his footnotes suggests that Machiavelli was really an ally. He was the kind of a lukewarm. He was very lukewarm to monarchical rule or autocratic rule. He favored liberty, the lust for liberty. That's a kind of a book of. There's a collection of his poems and his essays. That's in the 1950s and 60s that someone put together into the term lust for liberty. We assert with Machiavelli, and this is the lust for liberty, right? That people living under their own laws and their freedoms have a lust for liberty. And because of that, like he says, let's go back here. They never that they what? That they they have refuge for rebellion in the name of liberty and those ancient orders. They're not forgotten through lengths of time or through benefits, right? He says in the previous paragraph. And unless you have, if the inhabitants are not disunited or dispersed, they neither forget the name, that name, freedom, liberty, and those orders. And like he says, every accident will give rise to them to reassert it. And therefore, this is why you need to, this is the not, and this is why you need. This is that line here. This is why the last sentence. But republics, there's greater life, greater hate, more desire for vengeance. Not thinking that if you're a prince, do you really want to deal with go live there? Living there. You don't think they're going to try to kill you? These people who have vengeance, have hate. Okay, in other words, they have great. Unless you destroy, and the only way you can keep them is by destroying them. If you look at this, what he says here, it does not make any sense that he's silent about it because it's not really an option. This is maybe the case. In a philosophical argument, the silence might be for somebody. Okay, this is why I would sometimes the argument is that something is conspicuous by its absence. The question is what means it's conspicuous. The absence of the argument for this is conspicuous. In other words, the argument for living there, it's conspicuous here. Now, but what does it mean? Is the conspicuousness pointing towards that this is really the better argument, or is it conspicuous that it's not worth trying? Well, let's just right now. We just reason through it, right? If you're the prince ruling this, and these people are what, so much that any excuse would cause them to rebel, and what they are what the greatest hate and more desire for vengeance. You don't think they're gonna the one who is destroying their liberty? Who take away their autonomy and their freedom, that they're not going to kill you? So living there is by no means a safe thing. You end up having to ruin them anyways. You can't hold them by setting up a few of them to rule for you, because what will happen is eventually the enemies of that, like they happen in Athens and every other time. Those people will be thrown out as traitors once the ruler prince does not have enough forces, or it leaves them alone at an occasion. The people will rise up against their traitorous quislings, right, and remove them. So you have to keep in order to keep that guy in power, you're going to have to keep what? Men-at-arms there, right? You have to keep your garrisons, which are, again, expensive. It becomes expensive. So therefore, wait a minute, is this really worth it? Does it become worth it? That if, in other words, the example of this is the best way to keep somebody who's just living there is kill them all. Disperse them. If you're going to occupy them, you're going to do it. You got to do it the Russian way. The Russians were, they would conquer. Stalin and Soviets, when they conquered a part of that, what they would do immediately is kill the important rulers, the other elites. Then they would take, or most of the elites, they might save some elites that are favorable towards them, or maybe share their ideas, or their fellow communists in that sense. But they would then do what? They would, if they were inside the Soviet Union, they would do what? They would mix the populations together to prevent nationalism, to prevent national identity, national uprisings. They would move the peoples all over the place to just what? To disunite them, to prevent them from having the natural ties of a nation or a language that would allow them to challenge the Bolsheviks. So again, this is where we leave off in this chapter. This is why it's a smaller chapter. This is why it's kind of a brief thing. We leave here at this idea of, again, for the first time, we hear the city. Here we deal with people who are giving free. Here we see Machiavelli's teaching on republics and liberty here. We see the beginning of it. So therefore, again, thank you very much. And if you've liked this, please, if you have any comments, please put them below. If you like this, please like it. And if you want more of the content, please share it. Not share it, but please subscribe. And if you liked it and you want to share it with friends, please do share. Again, I hope you all have a good day, and take care. See you next time.